Hey guys, it's Amy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day as always. Today we're going to be looking at the trial of Zachary Koehn. This is day 3, part 1 of the trial, and I'm sad to say that I could only get a clip that started partway through the prosecution's questioning of the witness being Dr. Dennis Klein. So we will start there, and I will be back with the next part of day 3 as well as the rest of the trial. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Section 7, you marked occipital lobe white matter, and I'll let you say the last.
So that's gliosis. So occipital lobe is the back of the brain. There's two big components of the brain. There's the gray matter, that's the outside, and that's very thin. You can almost think of that as the thinking portion of the brain. That's where all the neurons are. And then there's the white matter, which is the central portion of the brain. That can almost be thinking of the wires. So all the signals, or the thinking part of the brain is on the outside, and then there's all the wires or the white matter. If the brain is injured or insulted in any way, such as a period of lack of oxygen or injury, and the person survives for many days to weeks, much like we get a scar if we get a cut on our skin, the brain also can scar in a way, and that scarring we call gliosis. I don't know what causes gliosis. It's something that happened probably weeks ago, and we do know that Sterling was not born in a hospital, so we don't have good records of what actually happened during that birthing process. But we know that babies during the delivery process, especially if they're not under medical care, can have periods where there's going to be anoxia or not enough oxygen. So I think the most likely explanation for this older injury is birth-related.
And then the next section, number 8, tell us about that.
So it's a term called watering astrocytes in the basal ganglia. So deep within the brain, there's an area called the basal ganglia. And this is you can almost think of this as a switchboard of the brain where signals are being transmitted and sent to certain areas. In order to hold all these wires together, you need cells that just form the framework. They're almost like the fuse box to just hold the wires and fuses in place. These are called astrocytes. If a person has had some insult, we most commonly see this actually in people with liver disease, but you can also see it in people who have been insulted, such as from malnutrition. So some of the things that we see in people with chronic liver disease, those same chemicals can also occur in people who have had prolonged malnutrition. So I don't know exactly what caused this, but I suspect that these particular abnormalities, again, are malnutrition related.
You also note that there was a perforation of the stomach post-mortem. What significance does that have for you?
Well, my ability to see, was there anything in the stomach that I could measure to look for? Was there formula? Was there food? Was there anything else in the stomach? I wasn't able to do that. The significance that there was a perforation, we always worry about that, could this have been inflicted? I don't think that's not the way I interpreted this. If the body is starting to decompose, and the stomach is much more susceptible than the rest of the body because there's enzymes, there's acid in the stomach there to digest food. Once you die, your stomach then becomes much more susceptible to just basically the tissue basically starts to decompose, and there's just a perforation or an opening in that stomach.
So basically the stomach broke open.
It just broke open from just starting to decompose.
But that happens after death?
Yes.
Did that in any way assist you in helping to decide how long Sterling had been dead?
It certainly let me know that there had been a period of time many hours as opposed to just a short period of time.
Good place to take a break. All right. I think I've been going to reach approximately. Wait up.
All right.
So you can keep that motion. Going through some of the photographs from the autopsy with Dr. Klein. As we're going through these, if at any time we need a break, want to get some air, just take a break away from it, please get my attention and take that break, okay? This is going to be of a graphic nature, and I just want to make sure everyone's as comfortable as we can be under the circumstances, all right? Just a moment.
Just to be clear on a couple of things that, from what we've talked about, there's no indication anywhere from Sterling that there was any type of assaultive injury to him.
That's correct.
And when we talk about malnutrition and dehydration in an infant, infants are either breastfed or receive formula, correct?
Correct.
Or with the water and then providing that to the child. What is it within that affects the malnutrition and the dehydration?
Right. So formula has a certain amount of the right ratios of the various nutritional requirements of proteins, fats, and electrolytes to the sodium with the appropriate amount of water, so it's absorbed and provides the correct amount of each of those nutrients that's needed.
So it's the powder, the formula part that gives the nutrition,
Yes.
and the water that it's mixed with that hydrates our children.
Yes.
And is that why, doctors stress you have to mix it just like the bottle says, and just to make sure they're getting the right amounts?
That's correct, both for the right amounts and also so it's absorbed correctly.
You said a little bit earlier that you did look at other possibilities. Did you make an attempt to rule out any natural diseases that would have made him end up like this?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, by doing the autopsy, part of the reasons for doing autopsies is to document normal anatomy as it is to document abnormal anatomy. So there were no anatomical things that can happen, such as obstructions in the bowels, twisting of the bowel. There was no heart defects that sometimes can cause children to not thrive correctly. There were no abnormalities of the brain that were genetic in nature or were structurally abnormal. And then we also did cultures, which means we send specimens to a laboratory to look for common reason why children don't thrive. Common reason why children don't thrive is from bacteria and parasites. Not so much in this country, but we went ahead and ruled those out.
So nothing natural that would have done this.
Yes, correct.
Now, we have heard testimony that Sterling was born just a few weeks early. Did that have caused any of this?
In reviewing the medical records, the child was seen in the neonatal intensive care unit, was treated with antibiotics, but the child was, in the opinions of the doctors, doing well enough to be sent home, and so survived that delivery at home, and I think was appropriately treated. So that small amount of prematurity, I don't think had any bearing on Sterling's death.
And so you did look at Sterling's birth records from the hospital, correct?
Correct.
Nothing in there that stood out to you that was an issue?
No.
All right. We've talked about the 3 individual causes of death: dehydration, malnutrition, and infection from diaper rash. Could any one of those things in and of themselves cause this child's death?
Yes.
in this particular case, did the multitude of those three factors working together make this different?
I think each of them, like we said, each of them could independently have caused the death, and absolutely together would certainly make the death occur maybe sooner. But because they're all present and they all are related in some way, I think they're all important when we consider this case and what actually caused the death.
Are you able to say what came first, or does it matter?
I think the malnutrition is something that I think has been going on for quite some time. The dehydration, obviously we can survive longer without food than we can without water. So the malnutrition would probably come first. And then the dehydration would come. And then also the infection. There was a period of time that it took for that skin to break down, and from the time that the bacteria first starts to enter and when it really gets into the bloodstream, that can vary from maybe a couple of days to maybe several hours.
How quickly would you start seeing signs of distress in an infant from any one of these factors?
So the malnutrition, the thing that one may notice is the baby's energy level and their ability to interact, even things such as crying, which is a normal developmental thing. It actually prompts caregivers to realize that the child needs something, whether it's they're hungry or they're uncomfortable or something's wrong. That may be one of the early things to have been affected by the malnutrition. Dehydration also can cause severe lethargy or real tiredness, low energy, inability to do those normal things that babies would do.
And the diaper rash, how quickly can it get that bad?
The simplest, I don't know. Diaper rash can start to appear quite quickly within a day, but to get to that level, it would likely take several days, maybe up to a week to get to that level of diaper rash.
Let's just talk about the last 20 or so days of Sterling's life.
The malnutrition would show that the baby is just not gaining weight, but continuing to gain length. So just the features of the child would change over time. They would just start to look thinner. The interactions that you would start to see even at a couple of months old with the child, you just start to have some interaction, whether it's eye contact, following the hand, some of those early developmental things you may not notice. Obviously, when a child is not being fed as often, we expect a certain frequency of diaper changes. Those might actually get longer, or the amount of actual feces produced might be less. And I think those would be the major.
Is it fair to say that maybe initially more at the beginning, the child might be louder, wanting food, crying out, things like that, and then you would see a natural decline in that to the point where the child's just lethargic and not responding?
Yes.
What if somebody touched Sterling every day during that time frame? What if someone had picked him up during that time? What would he feel like to them?
So there's a number of things going on. The infection may be the one thing to focus on for the moment. When someone becomes infected, one of the early things that's going to happen is the person will develop a fever, so they would be very warm to the touch, and they would actually start to sweat, so they'd be very wet. And so, the classic is your mother putting her hand on your forehead to see if you have a fever. It's noticeable that you would have that fever. In Sterling's case, where he actually had what's called bacteremia, so the bloodstream was filled with bacteria, the E. coli that was originated from the feces that went through the skin and the diaper area. When you get to a certain level of infection, you can actually go into what's called sepsis. And you go through a fever stage, and then you can actually become hypothermic, where actually your temperature drops and you become actually cold. And that would be something that someone may notice, especially if you're in a warm room, that the person would actually start to feel cool.
And Sterling,
So what is going. What I look at is I say, we have a source of infection, we had infection in the blood. Most likely this person had sepsis with this degree of pathology.
what would this natural progression of Sterling's medical condition and the state that he was in, what would that smell like to the senses?
In Sterling's case, the diaper and the feces that were accumulated and decomposing, combined with the urine, would be, I think, the most noticeable thing. It would be a very noticeable, pungent, very noticeable, unpleasant smell. There would be both of stool and then it could even be almost like a sewage type of smell because it's decomposing feces.
And during the autopsy, you were subjected to that as well?
Yes.
What would the natural progression of his decline during this time frame sound like?
It would probably be silent. When children if they're sick, if they're dehydrated, and they're malnourished, the thing that their only real defense mechanism is making noise so that someone can help them. And that's one of the things that they lose in all three of these things.
So like we discussed earlier, that maybe at first when they still had the energy, more excessive.
That's correct.
This may sound like an odd question, but do babies, infants, have the same sensory feelings that we have? Can they feel pain and discomfort and things like that?
It's a difficult question. They certainly have all the nerves and they have the connections. Part of pain is your understanding of pain, but they certainly respond to when they're placed in uncomfortable position, when they are given vaccinations, when they don't feel well because they have congestion. We know that their cries are different. We know that they're what we would describe as unhappy. So they certainly are perceiving these stimuli which are unpleasant to them. How they intellectualize that, I think that's hard for us as adults to know, but they certainly are reacting differently when they have painful and uncomfortable stimuli versus when they are comfortable and well-fed.
Do they have the natural basic sense of pain
Yes.
at the minimum? So for Sterling in that position that he was in, what would the natural progression of his decline feel like for him? What's he feeling during that time?
Objection relevant. Overrule.
If we take each of these differently, so the malnutrition as far as hunger is one of those major survival drives in humans. And so the hunger is going to be a feeling of discomfort to a child. They're going to respond by crying. And there's going to be this feeling that they may or may not understand, but it's going to respond in a verbal stimuli of crying. Dehydration is going to vary. There's still a thirst drive that people are going to have. That's one of the more powerful drives for survival, is to make sure that you have enough fluid. So there would be some stimuli. How that child understood that, I don't know, but that would be something that they would respond by crying. And then there is the infection component, which when we have a fever, that's a generally uncomfortable feeling. It's just they're going to respond to that by being cranky and irritable. And then finally, the rash. It's tender. It's going to be very painful for touching that area. As you start becoming more infected and you become more dehydrated, your ability to actually respond and have what your awareness of these various stimuli, I think, would probably decline over time.
Doctor, someone had claimed to be with Sterling on August 29th, the day before 911 was called, and said that Sterling looked healthy. Would you find that possible or probable?
Well, I can comment that the child, when I did the autopsy, and you will probably get to see the photos, and you'll be able to see that the child looks like it's malnourished. It's somewhat emaciated. It does not look like a baby that has been fed and starting to have sort of that chunky baby appearance that one usually interprets as a healthy baby. That's not the case. So that would be the first observation I think one could make. The other is just the odor, I think, would be based on what I saw at autopsy, that the feces were not fresh, that they had been there for a period of time, that just that day before, that was probably the same diaper with the same decomposing feces. That would have a very distinct odor that one would notice.
If someone said that Sterling on August 29th was interacting with them and grasping their finger or doing things like that, do you find that possible or probable?
There are possibilities that someone can, there are natural reflexes that babies have that when you put certain stimuli in. I think a normal interaction, though, as far as being able to make eye contact or follow your eye or have some sort of that engagement, given how dehydrated, malnourished, and infected the child was, I would expect the child would have been non-interactive with a person who's trying to interact with them.
Right, let's talk about time of death. We see on the TV shows that the medical examiner shows up at the scene and says, I think the time of death is 11:52. Is that how it works?
No.
Okay, how does it work?
So there is no scientific test that can tell us exactly when someone dies. The only way you know exactly is if there's a doctor or nurse who is there at the time with a stethoscope or an EKG pad to tell you exactly when that person died. There are certain changes that occur after death that medical examiners use to give an estimate or a range of when the person may die. And the three classic things that people use are temperature, so you can actually feel the person. Are they warm? Are they cool? Or are they actually cold? We use rigor mortis, which is the stiffening of muscles. So first, the body, right after it dies, there's going to be no rigor mortis. Then over a period of many hours, the rigor mortis gets more and more intense. it stays there for a period of time, and then it eventually releases. And then there's livor mortis, which is a settling of blood in the what we call the gravitationally dependent areas, and that slowly accumulates over time. So we use all those things to give an estimate in terms of within maybe 8 to 12 hours versus 24 to 36. And there are a number of assumptions that are all used with those. But again, they're just good guesses as to when a person died.
In this particular case, are you able to give an opinion as to the range of time that Sterling died?
I'm not able to give a definite time of death or even really a range.
All right, let's talk about the actual autopsy a little bit. Deputy Palo was here earlier and discussed with the jury about how he would set up Sterling's swing so you could see him in the position that he was when he was found. Is that right?
Yes.
Did that assist you in any way in making some determinations about this case?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It allowed me to see the circumstances that Sterling was in at the time of his death and the place of his death.
Can you describe to the jury the general steps that you went through with Sterling in regards to this autopsy, where you started out and where you ended?
Sure. Really, we have a protocol that we follow, and we follow that protocol here. What we do is it's basically a layer-wise and stepwise process. So where we had the swing and the clothing and the blankets, we took them off in a layer-wise, examined them, and we do that the same way when we get to the body. We examine it, clothing, we examine it, we take pictures. We actually do an internal component of the body, looking at all the organs, weighing the organs and taking.
Prior to this, to being here today, did I ask you to pick out some photographs from the autopsy that you thought would be relevant and helpful for the jury to better understand your testimony?
Yes.
May I approach?
You ready?
I'm handing you exhibits 104 through 118. And if you could just...
Yes.
Are those all photographs from your autopsy?
Yes.
This time the state would offer exhibits 104 through 118, or I'm sorry, 100 through 118.
Any objection? Object for reasons previously stated. Based on the previous ruling, the argument.
And doctor, it may be easier, other witnesses have stood up
Okay.
at the screen to point things out. Okay, the first picture that's going to come up, just so the jury knows.
Why would it be easier having on the other side?
Well, if he's going to face this way, I can hear him better, maybe. But if it's easier when he speaks up, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, would that be better?
That work better?
We just discussed this earlier yesterday with another witness, and it was hard with the back turned for her to hear sometimes.
I understand.
The first picture that's going to come up is a picture of the body bag. Is it fair to say that the photographs are just a natural progression through your autopsy?
Yes.
And in fact, we didn't include any photographs that involve looking at the inside of Sterling or anything like that.
That's correct.
And I have it up, states Exhibit 100. Tell us what that is.
So this is the body bag, and you can see this is a number and the date that the autopsy was done. There's a tag that seals the two zippers, so this shows us that the bag was not tampered with from the time from the scene to when it arrived at our office in time of autopsy.
On the screen, I have two photographs, Exhibit 101 and Exhibit 102, side by side. Talk to us about Exhibit 101.
So when we received Sterling, he was in the car seat, and this holder came separately. So what we wanted to do is see exactly, to reconstruct exactly the way it was in his residence. So that's what it looked like. This is a close-up. We haven't touched or done anything. You can see the blankets. You can see the clothing. You can see a little bit of this material coming out of the mouth. It's probably, it may be dry vomit, but it may also be what's called purged fluid, which is a normal, after death, sometimes there's fluids that leak out from the mouth and the lung area that come, and then it's dry.
So any blood, we have heard testimony that it appeared he had dried blood on his mouth. That wasn't from some type of assault. That was a natural effect of the death.
That's correct. Yeah, often purged fluid is often misinterpreted as blood.
You talked about the blanket in Exhibit 102. That was on top of Sterling, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I have up Exhibit 103. Tell us about this.
So this is the blanket. We laid the blanket out so you can see, and this was over the bottom portion of Sterling. So this just shows one of the blankets that was covering him.
Is that a child-sized blanket or a full-size blanket?
This is a fairly good-sized blanket. You can see here this is a 6-inch ruler. So we're talking, that's probably like 2 foot by 2 foot blanket.
Was it just folded up and set on top of them, or just kind of thrown in?
Kind of scrunched up and placed on top.
Exhibit 104, this is actually a close-up of Exhibit 103. What's the relevance of this?
So we took a close-up. Here's the ruler, and then you can see these white, these are maggots. So these were crawling on the blanket.
Where else did you observe maggots crawling?
So we saw maggots in puparia, both covering that's normally in the car seat, and then we actually saw it on the onesie worn by Sterling.
You said puparia. What do you mean by that?
So in the life cycle of a fly, you have a fly comes and lays eggs. That egg develops into eventually larva and then turns into puparia, which is sort of the life cycle changes of the fly. And so we saw various stages of the development of the maggot.
And you said you saw it in the car seat. Do you mean the swing seat?
That's right, yeah. The swing seat. Yes.
I now have up Exhibit 105 and 106. In Exhibit 105, it appears that you've taken the blanket off. Is that correct?
We've taken the blanket off. You can see that the strap is still in place on the Exhibit 105. You can see that there's some clothing that's stuffed in around the sides and the back of Sterling. Then in 106, we've taken the belt and splayed that open, so then you can see that there was some more clothing stuffed in around the diaper area. And then you can also appreciate the staining of both the pants and the onesie that are basically absorbing all the stool and urine and other secretions.
The blankets and things that you took off of Sterling, were they wet?
Yes.
Fair to say this is the beginning of your autopsy. Were you just taking things off layer by layer?
Layer by layer, yes.
Any of those layers that you took off, were they not wet or dirty?
They were all wet and had this, the absorption of all the feces and urine.
Doctor, can you also tell us We've seen photos of Sterling where his little arms are out and his hands are clenched. Does that?
Eyes, whatever position they're in, as long as no one has moved them, that's the position they're going to stay. So at the time that Sterling died, his hands may have been clasped. There are various neurological responses that happen when a person dies, and some of those responses involve clenching and turning the arms and doing these different, what's called posturing. And those could have been going on at the time, that's why his hands are in those positions.
There's 8 on the screen.
107, so we've removed Sterling now, and then you can see that there's this, I describe it as a short sleeve, hooded type sweatshirt that was stuffed in and around the base area. Another just a loose article of clothing. And then there are also other articles of clothing. You can see here they're infant mittens, and there were 3 of those, and there was a sock. And then there were numerous other onesies, just loose onesies, 3 other loose onesies stuffed in and around Sterling.
In Exhibit 108, that's is that a shirt?
I described it as a short sleeve hooded sweatshirt. It had a zipper, so it's a little bit heavier cloth than the onesie material, but it's not like a jacket. So it would be like a spring type of sweatshirt type.
Is that an adult size or a child size?
Child size.
When you say these things are just stuffed in and around, did you see a purpose for that, or what was?
I didn't really see any purpose as far as providing any type of insulation. I was told that the room was actually quite warm, so I don't have any reason why that material would be stuffed in and around the body like that.
But those items were soaking up the feces in there?
Yes.
Exhibit 109, what are we looking at here?
So this shows, we laid out some of the different articles. So here's the 3. There was a pair and then one other type of mitten. There was a sock. There were the other onesies. You can see part of the blanket and then this other sweatshirt. So this just shows the various articles that were stuffed in and around Sterling.
And Exhibit 110 and 111 are on the screen. What is 110?
So 110 is we've removed a lot of those clothing. So now you can see that, again, this is the seat area. And you can see that there is a staining, and that's all the absorption of a lot, again, of the feces and urine that soaked through the diaper and clothing into the seat area of the swing seat.
And Exhibit 111?
So 111 is this is the clothing that was worn, and we haven't removed it. You can see that there's obviously it's wet. It shows again that absorption, and you can see this gray sludge-like material. This is some of the decomposing feces material that's starting to leak outside the diaper into the outside of the clothing.
So that gray, almost triangle shape that we see on the onesie, that's feces.
Decomposing feces, yes.
How much did Sterling weigh at autopsy?
He weighed 3,152 grams, and that's just under 7 pounds.
I think the next picture that is coming up is going to be more of a close-up of Sterling's body. Exhibit 112, tell us what that is.
So this is the onesie that was actually worn. and you can see that there are maggots crawling on the clothing.
Did you see maggots on the
This directly on the skin, just on his clothing.
113?
So this is the covering in the swing seat, and we talk about maggots, and then as maggots mature before they actually become flies, they go through a puparia, and these are the puparia that we saw. So this is showing a different stage in the fly maggot life cycle.
Which tells you that those insects have been there for a while.
Yes.
Now I believe a picture will come up of a close-up of Sterling. So I have exhibits 114 and 115. Tell us about 114.
So 114 shows where the clothing has been removed and the diaper has just been displayed. And so we haven't cleaned the body, but you can see now the direct contact of the decomposing feces in contact with the skin. And what you'll notice is that there's this redness to the skin. That's the severe diaper rash. And so making that connection of feces causing this rash, ultimately leading to an infection, here's what we see as the objective observation of feces causing irritation, sloughing, and diaper rash on the skin in the areas covered by the diaper.
Exhibit 115, what do we see there?
And this is just the reverse side. So we're seeing the Sterling's back and his buttocks, and you can see the concentration of the skin sloughing is right over the buttocks, and then the redness that you see is the irritation from being in that contact with that stool for prolonged periods of time.
Exhibit 116 and 117 are on the screen. What are we seeing in those?
So in this stage of the autopsy, what we've done is we've very carefully tried to clean the feces away so that you can actually see what the skin looks like. And normal skin you could use as a reference down lower parts of the leg. The abnormal skin, the dermatitis or diaper rash, is we see this redness. So that means all those superficial layers are eroded and sloughing away, and there's blood vessels there, and it's irritated. And then you can actually have major portions of skin sloughing you can see up around the tailbone area.
In Exhibit 116, we're seeing the front side of Sterling. At the top of the picture, is that his ribs?
So here is the rib cage right here. Here's the belly button. So it was coming up pretty much over a majority of the abdomen.
Would you also say that in being able to see the ribs as clearly as you do, that's part of that malnutrition as well?
That's correct.
In Exhibit 118, what is this a photo of?
So this gives you an idea of what could you observe by just looking at the child. And so you would see the child's face. What you can see here is that, again, a lot of the typical fat that's in around the cheeks is absent. The eyes are very dry. They almost had a bluish color, which I suspect is just from being so dried and dehydrated. You can sort of appreciate here, but also describe it. There's the soft spots in a baby. These were actually sunken because of dehydration. I think that those are the major things that you can appreciate without having to do an autopsy or even removing any clothing. This is what you'd be able to see.
Is it fair to say when you looked at Sterling, being a doctor, did you just immediately say, this kid's malnourished?
Yeah, we know just from, one of the early things that we do is weigh the child, and then we can also just look at that soft spot. So I was immediately concerned that this was going to be a dehydration and malnutrition.
And we also, in this picture, we see I see some red marks on the neck. Does that mean anything to you?
This is what's called livor mortis. So this is one of those three things that we use to estimate how long a person has died. So when you start to see this, it starts to appear maybe an hour, and it becomes more intense, and then actually becomes fixed over time. This is not a bruise, it's just a post-mortem change that we see.
You know, talk about rigor. When the MEs, the medical examiner at the scene, investigator at the scene, he had put that rigor was 3 in the report. What did that mean to you when you read that?
So that means to me that was 3 means it's full rigor. So it's gone through the chemical processes enough that the person was in full rigor. It indicates that the child did not die just a couple of hours before, that there had been some time that the child had been dead.
Okay. And when you say sometime, do you mean a day or 5 days or?
So typically, rigor mortis in an adult who is not infected would develop full rigor mortis after about 8 hours. And the following 8 hours, it would remain in that full rigor. And then the following 8 hours would start to dissipate. Now, in a young child, that...
Are we doing the photograph? Let's take that down. What's that?
Okay.
I just don't think they need to put the photo on this explaining.
So in a young child, all those processes tend to take less time. If a person has an infection and their body temperatures, because all these things are related to temperature, that also can shorten the amount of time. And then if the person is in a warm environment, so we typically say it's about 68 to 70 degrees when we use these estimations. I had information that the room was warmer, maybe closer to 80 degrees, 75 to 80 degrees. That would also hasten or lessen those amounts. So to give that exact time, but I suspect we're in full, the MAC, you would expect that to be about 8 to 12 hours in a normal person, but it may be less than that in this case.
May I approach?
You may.
I'm handing you State's Exhibit 99. What is that?
So this is it's a growth curve, and on it I've put both the weight and length measurements for Sterling, both the birth weight and what I measured at autopsy.
It would offer Exhibit 99.
Any objection to 99? No objection. Admitted.
Permission to publish?
Grant?
It's a little hard to see up on the TV, but I have Exhibit 99 up there. Is this the growth chart? You take your baby to the doctor and they start tracking growth. Is that what this is?
It's the same one, yes.
Okay. Tell us what you did with this growth chart.
So there are 2 curves here. This one is for weight, and this one is for length.
And for the record, the weight is on the bottom and the length is on the top.
Correct. The red marks indicate what were in the medical records at time of birth, and then the black marks indicate my measurements at time of autopsy. So you can see here let's take the weight, was right around 3, this is 3 kilograms, and then we move over 3 months, and then we can see we're just above 3 kilograms to 3.1 kilograms over the course of 3 months. His birth weight was right around in the 10 to 25th percentile. We would expect, if he remained on that curve, that he would be upwards of around 5 kilograms. So it would be roughly almost 11 pounds versus being just under 7 pounds. And then for the length, we can see he was 18 inches and then had grown. Now he was definitely off or below the curve. we don't really know where he would have been because we only have 2 measurements. So ideally, you'd like to have pediatric visits in between here so you can see what their curve is going to be as an established growth rate.
And you had talked about, I have a son who's very short and always has been. So he's always been right at the bottom of the height chart. However, the moving up, so it's all okay and there's no problem. And that's exactly what you're not seeing here when it comes to somewhat to the height, but mostly to the weight.
Correct. Like once you have a couple of points on here, what a doctor is going to look for, so we're following this curve, and then all of a sudden a child starts dropping, or it just doesn't do anything here, we know something is wrong. That's why you want to bring the baby to the doctor for those regular visits, so we can start getting some points on that curve so we can tell if something is wrong.
Doctor, at the beginning of your testimony, you said you look for a couple things, or you answer a couple of things, cause of death and manner of death. You have cause of death, malnutrition, dehydration, infection. Did you provide an opinion about the manner of death? And what is the manner of death?
Homicide.
Overruled.
Homicide.
And what do you base that opinion on?
I base it on my autopsy findings and the circumstances described to me surrounding the death.
And again, doctor, with a child this age, that child cannot survive without the assistance and care of other people, correct?
Correct.
I have no further questions.
They need a break? You need to go across? Talking with you about your determination of the manner of death. Your testimony is that the manner of death is homicide, correct?
Correct.
And as used by you, the manner of death, homicide, does not mean the same thing as murder, right?
That's correct.
In your use of the term, it is a medical term, correct?
Correct.
I'd like now to move to talking about dehydration. If it's okay with you, I'll just use the lay terms for that.
That's fine.
Children lose water more quickly than adults, correct?
Yes.
And that is one of the factors that makes it difficult to give a time frame for how long Sterling would have needed to be dehydrated.
Correct.
And the time that Sterling could have been dehydrated before it became fatal could vary anywhere from hours to days, right?
Correct.
Regarding the infection that you testified about, your opinion is that the infection itself would have taken many days to develop?
Yeah, I think that the amount of time from with no diaper rash to being infected probably would have taken days. From the amount of time once there was an established diaper rash to having actual bacteremia or bacteria in them, that would vary maybe from a day to, that could even happen in hours.
On direct examination, we talked about rigor being present when Sterling was found. Did you rely upon the preliminary medical examiner's report?
Yes.
And I just want to make it clear, it takes less time for rigor to develop in an infant than in an adult, correct?
Yes.
And in an adult, we're talking 8 to 12 hours after death before that sets in.
Correct.
But there were a couple of factors in Sterling's case that could have contributed to accelerating rigor, right?
Correct.
Those factors are the blood infection rate
Yes.
and warmer temperature in the room.
Yes.
It was reported to you that it was warm in the room, correct?
That's correct.
And because of this, you weren't able to give us an exact time of death for Sterling.
Correct.
You testified about the preliminary report of the Chickasaw County Medical Examiner, you reviewed that in coming to your determinations, correct?
Yes,
And that report reported to you the child had last been seen alive on August 29th by the mother, right?
that's what, yes,
At about 2000, which is about 8 o'clock p.m.
that's correct.
And is it possible that Sterling passed away on August 30th, 2017?
That's possible, yes.
Thank you, doctor. I don't have any other questions. Redirect.
Judge, can I just clarify with the court, exhibits 119 and 120, were those offered earlier and accepted?
$119 and $120 have not been offered, nor has $122.
Dr. Klein, and I'm not showing these photographs to the jury. I'm going to give you exhibits 119, 20, 21, and 22. Are these also photographs that you took at your autopsy?
Yes, they are.
State would offer 1, 2.
I just want to be clear, I think there's not a 121, is that correct? I don't have a 121.
There is a 121.
Okay, there's not one of them.
We can take care of that.
Well, I probably need to look at it before I admit it.
Oh, actually, Judge, it's, so you got the 121, so 119, 120, and 122.
There you go. I just want to make sure. The reasons previously stated for defense objects. Very good.
I don't have any questions.
I'll recross. Ms. Witness Leedsky. After you are released.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Well, we just take our break now and we'll come back at 1. Easy to do it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, continue to heed the admonition during the lunch break this evening.
All rise, please, jury.
I don't think you can use a break.
I apologize, I forgot I left that blank because it was one that was already.
It's okay. I wasn't trying to, I just want to make sure. I was